Hi, in this video I would like to tell you the story of the Silverplåten project, the process of making the sculpture from silver and how it ended up being exhibited here at the Nationalmuseum Stockholm. In 2021 I got the opportunity to be part of Silverplåten, a scholarship by the Ulf Gillberg and Lennart Agerberg Foundation within the Friends of the Nationalmuseum Stockholm. Alongside 5 other artists, I received a sheet of 925 sterling silver, measuring 300 by 300 by 0.9 mm, to create an object for a joint exhibition. With the possibilities I had available, raising a vessel the classical way was never really an option. After coming across expanded metal mesh and different paper packaging materials, the idea grew to form the sheet by constricting the techniques to cutting and bending. I started sketching by cutting paper models to understand cut patterns and their ratios. By arranging the cuts in a circular pattern, I discovered that this has the potential to create interesting three-dimensional volumes. The next step was to make small copper prototypes to see how a sheet metal similar to silver behaves and where the limitations are. I continued by constructing cut patterns in CAD and laser cutting paper to explore more complex patterns and forms. I quickly settled on the idea that I want to use two identical shapes as halves that are connected to create a closed volume. Since my silver sheet is perfectly square, I moved towards ellipses and these kidney shapes to be able to make two halves as big as my available material allows. The next step was to design a cut pattern and order laser cut copper parts. I designed this prototype quite a bit larger than the silver will be to test out tools and techniques. The little tabs you see on the outer perimeter are there to precisely indicate the solder joints where the two halves will be connected. After soldering, I filed these tabs flush. In most parts happy with this prototype, it was time to finalize the design for the real piece in silver. I made some alterations to the curvature of the kidney shape, but also on the drop-shaped ends of all my cuts. When metals are cut with CNC, no matter if it's laser, plasma or water jet, you always have an entry hole that is a little bit larger than the cut itself. Since I have so many internal cuts, I designed these drop-shaped ends to cancel out the entry hole and also to make the cut symmetrical, so it doesn't matter where the machine starts and ends the cut, both ends will look the same. It was quite a challenge to find a company that had the confidence and precision to cut the silver sheet, but in the end I found one that offers CNC micro water jet cutting. After waiting a few weeks, I got my silver sheet back. As you can see, I placed a small circular part into the space left out by the two kidneys. By making this small silver test piece first, I became confident with my tooling and was able to test surface finishes on silver. Now the time had come to start on the silver piece. I started by removing the corners of the sheet and the parts inside and in between the two kidneys. At this point I still had the protective film on the backside, so after removing it I was able to deal with cleaning all the cuts. I used a small ball burr to clean all drop-shaped ends before cutting chamfers on both sides of the cut with the specially made draw cutting tool. I smoothed out the chamfers with a burnisher. I sanded all surfaces and gave them a matte finish with fine abrasive fleece. I tried to do as much work on the flat sheet as possible before I shaped the metal. because once expanded, it gets very difficult to work on all the individual surfaces. Here you can see the comparison of one half still flat and the other one almost fully expanded. I used a combination of a wooden punch on a leather sandbag and just my hands to stretch out the silver. Also turning the flat tip of this wooden dowel worked great to enlarge the spacing. You see me wearing gloves all the time, so I don't leave oxidized fingerprints on the already matte finished surfaces. I also use mainly wooden tools or wrap the tips of these pliers in leather, so I don't leave any scratch marks. After the two halves were expanded roughly the same, I temporarily connected them with cable ties, so I can work on the overall shape of the piece and check the symmetry. Before soldering the two halves together, I needed to clean up all of the inside edges. The cut surface from micro water jet cutting was already quite smooth, but the burrs I created when chamfering the cuts in the first place needed to be filed down. I also decided to finish all outside edges because holding and working on the assembled piece is way more difficult than each half at a time. Because of its difficult geometry, the only way to polish the edges while leaving the side surfaces matte was by using a burnisher. A burnisher is a hardened and highly polished steel tip to smooth and polish soft precious metals. This works without the use of any polishing compound, just with pressure and maybe a little bit of oil for lubrication. Filing and polishing all edges of the piece was by far the most tiring and tedious part of the whole making process. After a few hours, your fingers hurt from applying constant pressure. When you start to constantly slip off and scratch the sides, you know it's time to call it a day. Now it was finally time to join the two halves. After aligning each solder joint, I applied some flux. I placed a small piece of silver solder into a recess I filed earlier into each tab before carefully heating the part until the solder melted and the connection was joined. I removed the flux residue and oxidation with a cotton swab soaked in pickling solution. Since their job was done, I could file the solder tabs flush. The side faces affected by the heat of soldering and the pickling solution needed a little care to blend in again. The last step of making the silver sculpture was to repolish the edges in the center. To reach the inside edges, now that the piece was closed, I made a bent steel tip for the burnisher. I gave my silver piece the title The Tales of True Equilibria, meaning that during this project, and sometimes also in my practice in general, there are several opposing issues that are difficult to balance out totally. The materiality, where precious silver is turned into some sort of expanded metal mesh, usually an ordinary construction material. The soft abstract body with its complex and technically structured yet transparent surface. Or the digital manufacturing of CNC water jet cutting and the meticulously executed craft of hand polishing. The Silverplåten exhibition took place in Södra Djurgården, the south courtyard of the Nationalmuseum Stockholm, from the 7th of September to the 2nd of October 2022. The Tales of True Equilibria was shown alongside the work of the other 5 scholarship holders: Viktor Eldervik, Veronica Södergren, Daniel Frayne, Simon Hallmann, and Beata Alfredsson Gran. The Silverplåten exhibition was later also shown at Steneby and Leksand, 2 Swedish metal art institutions that we 6 scholarship holders are connected to.